listen to our speakers later on. Now, in an ideal world, we'd of course all be in that top right part of the matrix, but it's not yet the case. Now, today we're going to try to help you, the family businesses, the consultants, and other interested parties to at least learn something about how to influence your own family business, how to secure its success and continuity. And we'll do that from different perspectives with different speakers from around the world. We have a wonderful program here that will be kicked off by Basma Al-Zamil with a practical session on why effective succession planning is essential for both business growth and family harmony. Basma is a consultant, but also a family member of a large family business. Following her will be Adam Smith, who will focus on leadership development. Then Elizabeth Bagger, who will address common obstacles to succession and how families can foster honest conversations. Then up is Charles Lightwise. He will present the 6 key elements necessary to build sustainable legacy. And not yet present, but he will join us shortly, will be Professor Tomaselli, who will be offering a systemic perspective, highlighting how business ownership and family systems evolve at different speeds. Now, after these presentations, that will be quite short, and there will not be any room for discussion directly after the presentations, but there will be some Q&A session after the last speaker, so after Salvo Tomaselli. Now, I tried to be as brief as I could, but I'm so excited about these speakers that I will gladly hand over to our first speaker, Basma Al-Zamil. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. And first of all, I would like to thank the Chamber for arranging this and having all of these great speakers with us in the same room. And to thank the attendees, I'm sure they're here today because they really care about the family first, then business. So I'm sure they're here because they really care about the family, and succession is talking about the family and the importance of it. Maybe the word succession is like it's sensitive for some people. However, maybe today we will try to explain it in another way. It is having a background of an HR. When we open the succession dialogue, sometimes people get nervous. So it's a sensitive word, and I'm sure the next speakers will talk about other words of succession. So thank you again. Talking about myself, really, it's I am a daughter, a 3rd generation in a family business. I'm a mother of a 4th generation, 2 kids who will be 4th generation, and I am an advisor for family businesses. So I'm wearing a lot of hats. So you might, I have a couple of hats that I'm wearing. So bear with me with jumping in these 3 hats. So I will share my screen with my presentation.
If for some reason it's not working, you could also make the presentation available after the seminar if you want.
Let's see. Okay, so this is what I'll be talking today about, the effectiveness of succession in family businesses. First of all, I want you all to think about this family tree. this is really about succession. This is really talking about the next gens going up and having all of these arrows. I think this is really what succession means. Every family have to really think deeply about the family tree and what are all of here. We can see here's one of the examples that we really have to think about. We have Warda, who has 25% of the shares, and the second generation, they have only 16.7, where the third generation has more shares. And this is really where succession has to be thinking of. Okay, what's next? How can the third generation and second generation talking about and preparing themselves? Secondly, I'll be talking about these three circles, which I think it's very important to share about these numbers. Every family member is representing one of these numbers. Every family member has to think about moving from one number to the other. So family members will move from 1 to 4, or will move from 1 to 7. This is the succession. When we move from one, we can say one part being a family member, then going to be a family member who's an owner, or family member who is an employee. So this is really about the succession in families. It's not about employment only, or only taking these roles in the family business. So it is more than. Again, talking about succession, it's about business, it's about ownership, it's about family. It's moving from one dot to the other. You can see it here, going from a controlling owner to a sibling to a cousin. This is the preparation of a succession. If we talk about business, it's a startup. Then how can we move it to a growing business? How can we grow it to a more enterprise, mature business? The succession is really talking about all of these in one part, in the family, not talking about money, not talking about the business. And this is what really today matters, and really what today we're talking about. This is the present, this is the future. What are we preparing for each one of these circles, and what we have in our family, and what is the succession planning in the family business? Really, it's not only about, again, it's not about only positions in these businesses. It's really presenting the legacy. It's really presenting the values of the family. It's the transition from one generation to another generation in a very smooth way. It's preparing the next generation either to be working in the family, either to be, we can say, active board members without working in the family. This is really the right succession. How can we do it? How can we have this business continue without the interfere or the conflicts that happens in the family? This is the real succession in a family business. Going and asking these questions. I have 4 simple questions, we can say. Our audience might be advanced in knowing exactly what a succession is, and some might be really this is their, like, now they are learning, we can say. So how it is effective? By the early planning, the leadership development plan that we have it for our next gen, the communication between the family member, governance. Again, I'm really, maybe you will hear this word from me, because if there is no strong governance in the family, succession will never happen. When we can say today, please work on your succession plan today. Try as much as you work on it as much as early as you can, because it is a continuous process that it will never end. When we say where does it will either be internally in the family, or we can say it's externally with a business consultant, internally in your meetings, in your dinners, in your retreats, externally when we have other people working with us. Even if we will say non-family executives who are working in the family, these are people who are very important people for us who will share with us succession planning for our families. Who is involved? Leaders, next gens, non-family executives, other family members. Even if they are not working in the family business, they are people who will prepare. Mothers preparing their kids to be next gens, even if they are not working. However, they are involved in the succession planning too. Having these the key aspects of the succession and how important it is, from identifying our successor to the plan that we have it, The communication that's between the family is very important. Having all of the legal documents signed and approved from the family member, having the family member understand the legal documents. It's not only about signing, it's also about understanding. Again, governance is a key, an important key too. Family businesses culture is really something important because we can see the family business really reflects the family values, the family culture, and we can see it when we go into these families and know more about them. Okay, we will talk about two critical aspects in the succession: the family relation and the business growth. The family relation, why the succession is important. You can see all of them. It's the continuity of the family, the continuity of the relationship. It is the legacy, which is, I think, it's the first thing that any family business has to think about. Conflicts, we need to minimize conflict as much as we can. Attracts and investments, because we can see that a lot of investments will go and work with these family businesses if they know that the relation is good between them, if they know that they have a good governance that will have this family business continue. So it is a very important thing for investments, and the transition will be smooth. If we will go to the business growth, we will have a lot of fresh perspectives that the next gens will have an eye and opportunity for it, and will have a trust. They will adapt the change quickly if everything was clear and was set up. Avoiding disputes and conflicts, and this is, I think, this is the one of the major things that succession has to have is transfer of assets. Anybody who wants to exit the business, it will be clear for them. And management wealth, the wealth management procedure, it will be very easy for all of the family members who are not involved in the business. So succession really, it's more about like a very bigger word than what we all think about. When we say, what are the steps? Start today. Yes, start today. Start about thinking about all of the family members whom you have, even the child who was born yesterday. We have to think about what he will be in the future. We have to involve our family. Yes, we have to involve them. We have to involve the family and to know exactly what are their thoughts, what's their future, what their things. And usually it's a very tough talk when you talk with the family about it. Consult professionals. They have been through a lot of stories. They heard a lot of things, and they have a lot of solutions. Document the plan, have a constitution, have everything written, have everything signed by your leaders. When you document it, it will be a very important documentation. And finally, review it and have an update version on it. Finally, I'll talk about the governance and the circle. The circle is really important for everyone to think about. This is really something that will lead to a successful succession from thinking deeply about each one of these 7 drivers. It's very important for the family. From there, it will be a very important aspect of succession being in this wheel. It will have a very a clear, we can say, succession plan for the family. My last slide will be this small structure of the family governance, and which will make really the succession effective if we had this structure there and implemented in the family business. So I hope it was like it was a very brief, quick, we can say, share of information that I have to the audiences here. Thank you very much, and I really recommend this book for everyone to read. It's a new book, and it has a lot of stories of the families all over the world talking about their successions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Basma. It was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
It's another example of how important planning is in family business, of course. And like the old saying goes, plans are nothing, but planning is everything. Next up, we have Adam Smith. Please share your thoughts and insights with us.
Asma, thank you for that start. That was wonderful. I'd like to thank the Islamic Chamber Training Academy and, of course, Miriam Hishman and the entire team for hosting this important and timely conversation. It's an honor to be here together with these panelists and be part of the dialogue that touches the very heart of sustainable family enterprise. And for me, the pillar of many family holdings and firms, which is the power, impact, and continuity of legacy. My name is Artem Smith, and I'm in the US. I'm a 30-year veteran of family enterprises, family private investing, holding companies, governance, and philanthropy. And in this journey, I have had the fortune to lead $1 billion of private direct investing, some with families, serving on about a dozen boards. I managed about 100 limited partners, some of them families, and serving about 80 private clients and family offices and their missions and goals cross-border as well. I'm the founder of merchant banking firm Ras Capital Partners, and also the founder of the Family Business Audiocast, which is a mechanism to have dialogues with important family owners and billionaires and offices and think tank owners around the world. And here I have the privilege to have conversations like this, to discuss their dreams and journeys and challenges within their own families and the family continuity, as we've seen in some of those recent slides. And I've learned a couple of key lessons in these conversations and in my experiences that succession is not just simply a transfer of ownership, but it's also the transfer of responsibility and also a vision and the stewardship of that. So I'll talk a bit about stewardship. I think succession is not really a moment, it's a journey. And that journey is complicated, it's not easy, and it takes courage and preparation and vulnerability. I've discussed about that a bit with Elizabeth on some of my earlier conversations. I think that journey takes preparation, and I wanted to focus on a bit about the next gens and involving them and nurturing them in that journey. So leadership, I think, is developed. It's not inherited most of the time. There's a myth, I think, that someone is born often into a family business and they're somehow ready to lead it. That is often the case. They can lead it, but it takes a lot of effort to prepare and nurture them for that journey. And of course, sometimes, as we know, they're not fit for that journey or they wish to depart that journey, and that's also okay. Leadership is not genetic, it needs to be developed. And it's not enough for next gen members to just simply share the family name. If they want to share that family name, that's wonderful. Sometimes they want to be somewhat separate from the family name. I think if they want to be part of it, they need to grow into the capabilities and wisdom and resilience that leadership demands. Today's world is super competitive, very global and complicated, and also increasingly AI and virtually driven. So it's quite tricky for the next gens, especially the millennial generation, kind of caught in between the evolution of acceleration of our society. So it's much more complex than when the family business was founded. I know Salvatore and Charles will talk about that a bit. I think in the best generations I've seen, I've had the honor to work with dozens of families as a common trait, and like sort of getting involved early in their teens, even to challenge the next gens, to get involved, to be expected to solve problems, to experience setbacks and not have fear of failure, and to shoulder real responsibility, even if they're not ready yet. That real experience creates courage and learnings, and those muscles are built of leadership, which is both intellectual and psychological. This is particularly important for our generation, talking as parents as well, that our next leaders are in their 30s and 20s, and they need both preparation and not as much protection. I think our society is protecting a great deal. It's also focusing on more short-term thinking. So this early leadership really should have a longer tail of involving them over years. So instead of starting at 21 out of college, maybe it's something coming to meetings early at the age of 15 or 16. Leadership development also does not happen only during a crisis. It doesn't always happen just a year before a sale of a company, let's say Goldman Sachs selling a company or Rothschild. This is a very important moment, but leadership needs to be developed for decades prior to that, so that readiness is cumulative. It's built step by step through exposure, mentorship, and challenge, and that self-discovery of the next gen. Even if they're not ready, they may never be ready, and it's also fair and essential for the owners to realize that they may not be ready, but if they're wanting to involve them to maintain that legacy with the next gen and children, is to equip them with essential resources to grow. Some of the most effective family enterprises, I think, deliberately expose their next gen members, family or non-family, to a range of experiences. Let's remember that next gen is not necessarily the family members. That brings up the broader topic of legacy and what the purpose of the wealth in the company is. It's not just the children's involvement and to require them to be involved, but it's rather the company's purpose and the continuity of that wealth and that brand and that legacy that exceeds the family itself. So, for example, internships outside the family business, sometimes in different industries. We see that in large industrial companies, rotational assignments across business, different units, functions, geographies, moving the children around. It's not so easy, but after college, for sure. Formal leadership programs. You saw some of the slides from Boss Mother's different councils. You can look at it as a think tank. You can bring them to business school or virtual business school classes and coaching projects. And then lastly, involvement in non-commercial activities as well is essential to get a broader view of the world, right? Community service, philanthropy, that teaches accountability beyond the wealth itself. A story that I recently saw was in Europe. Every next generation family member worked for 5 years outside the family business in their 20s before being considered for a leadership role. So instead of, let's say, LVMH, which is inside the company, this is a company that pushed them outside and brought that back in. So that really is not just about the skills. It brings in perspective and humility and a viewpoint that's more global. As a side note, our world is global still, despite some recent changes in the global political and foreign affairs landscape. So let's keep that in mind for our clients and our children. So this leadership is built through real stakes, I think, not just, simulations. It's earned. It's not just gifted. Also, as Elizabeth and others know, that gifting can create a certain emotional tension and imposter syndromes and guilt that is very difficult to embrace. And sometimes they just give up. So there's some scar tissue to and sociological challenges there to keep them in the business. So in summary, skills are not enough alone. I think the generation today especially needs something deeper, especially since the next generation, I believe, is losing some attachment to traditional institutions and values in their shorter term thinking and world, is to have more of identity to that leadership. That identity is shaped by two critical forces: strong governance and strong mentorship. Governance provides clarity and clear roles, fair opportunity structures, less favoritism, those transparent paths to decision-making, and then ultimately transition into leadership. And perhaps those next gens will ultimately decide to leave, but at least they were given the tools and a chance to succeed and stay in the company. And then without good governance, even the next gen most talented can be trapped and stuck without a voice and just burdened by these expectations that I'm referring to. So mentorship, which we're touching across this whole event today, provides a bridge. Senior family members, outsourced advisors, and even non-family executives must serve as mentors, not just mom and dad. There is some intimidation when it's just mom and dad, so it's important to go outside of that. And then that mentor also provides candid feedback that encourages leaders that are confident but not arrogant. So that arrogance is important to break down a little bit. That can be simultaneously next to that privilege and that guilt of needing to be as good as their parents. That's not really healthy, as much as just being included and embraced and supported as part of that role. So if we don't involve the next gen early enough, if we don't listen to them and challenge them, then we risk that there's leadership gaps, but also gaps in purpose for the company itself and the legacy. Again, legacy goes beyond the children and the wealth to the company and its impact on the world and community and the continuity of that wealth. So one idea to take away is just succession is not a transfer of title. It's a renewal, continuity of that vision and hope and responsibility. So the future is not something we just inherit for the next gen. It's something to prepare for. and bridge them into legacy and opportunity for them, for the company, and for the broader legacy of what that company touches, right? Their community, their employees, their wealth, their community, their country, their brand. So thank you for your time and attention and all of your commitment to building enduring family enterprises. It's been an honor to speak today. Thank you so much for my time.
Thank you very much, Adam. Wonderful to hear your views like this. I would just like to say to our live viewers that it's possible to ask questions in the chat, in the Zoom chat, and we'll ask them after the last presentation by Salvatore Tomaselli. About leadership, there's this old dichotomy between business first versus family first in family business research and practice. And I think, Adam, you added a third viewpoint to that by saying, well, maybe you should try purpose first. And then the choice and development of leadership will become much easier. Thank you so much. The next up is Elizabeth Bagger. Thanks for being here. And the word is, I pass it on to you.
Thank you very much, Maurits, and thank you to Mariam and to the Islamic Chamber of Commerce Training Academy. It's wonderful to be here. I hope you can all hear me okay. I am also going to share a few slides, so let me just do that right now. Let's see if I can, there we go. I hope you can see it okay. So I will be talking about strategies to overcome succession challenges, and within that we'll talk about having open, honest conversations. So I thought I would, and let me first up say I will touch on some of the same points that have already been mentioned, but I don't think that these issues, I don't think it's a bad idea to repeat some of the points. It's just such a big topic, important topic, that I think it bears repeating at times. So I wanted to start with looking at some of the challenges that we know are common in a succession. So what are the challenges we're looking to overcome? Well, that could be, a lack of a formal succession plan, could be even knowing where to start, choosing the right successor, but equally a lack of clarity of the process itself. Could be the founder's reluctance to step down. It could be, next generation preparedness. Then we have conflict within the family. Sometimes the question of fair versus equal come up. And we also have the management and ownership transitions. It's not one or the other, it's both, and not necessarily with exactly the same people at the same time. Breakdown in communication or a lack of communication. And of course, a lack of governance structures, and then cultural and emotional resistance and challenges. You can have a family who have family members in many different parts of the world, for instance. So I thought I'd jump straight to the strategies to overcome succession. So I think first and foremost, succession to me, I know it's about a lot of different things, but to me it's about people and it's about relationships. So when we know that, then we also know just how important communication becomes, just how important it becomes to understand how we all operate together. So family dynamics, having an intergenerational dialogue and addressing all the elephants in the room. And in a family business, there will be many. Could be fear on the, on the part of the next generation, on the part of the senior generations. There's such a thing as assumptions. We all make them all the time. And if we just look at how we operate in our own families, it's clear that we tend to make assumptions about family members, and we do it without even thinking about it. Old issues come up, and they could be from several generations ago. It doesn't have to be this generation or a living generation. It could be from the past, things that get passed on, which I know you will all have seen or felt. The role of governance. And again, this is really about creating places, spaces, voice, understanding how to work together and having clear and fair policies. So for instance, with employment policies, that becomes incredibly important, that we don't design it to keep family members out, to make it harder for them to come in. They have to be aligned with everything else that we're trying to do. And I'll come up with a few examples in a moment of some of these things. Developing the next generation, it's just not fair to hand something over to someone and not prepare them for it. I've seen it many times, what can happen when people just aren't prepared for the responsibility. So we need the formal education. There's also such a thing as mentoring, coaching, internships, either in your own family business or in someone else's. Could be in your own country or abroad. There are beautiful, wonderful networks around the world where those things exist. I know some families who go all the way to shadowing and having the next generation shadow them, both at home and in the workplace. And I also think something worth mentioning is developing a positive view of the business and what the family owns together. Because often, it can be, oh, the business is, difficult, it's trouble, it's hard, it takes their parents away, from children. And there's a lot of heaviness that needs to be counterbalanced with, this is fun, let's show them the fun too. I think that's really important. And then of course the philanthropy and community aspect, so that people become grounded in the ownership. I think that's incredibly important. Like, what does it mean to own together in all the most positive of ways? And what is it that we can do together because of that? And then I'd like to also just mention innovation and tradition, building a lasting legacy together by giving voice to all generations and not paying lip service to anyone, but truly making it collaborative, is where you will have the voice of experience adding their perspectives to things, and you will have the excitement and the energy of the next generation. We combine those, you're really creating, your superpower in my view. So just a couple of things before I move on. I think that I've seen examples of founders not wanting to let go, and I'm sure we all have, but I think it's worth bearing in mind that for some founders, and for some, they don't have to be founders, they can be leaders. There might be a third generation leader, but if they have dedicated, let's say, 40 years of their lives to an organization, if they've spent every waking moment thinking about that business, it's going to be hard to pass it on. So we need to give space and voice to whatever fears or concerns they might be having. And we also need to give space to all the next generation's dreams and desires. So I would always say, find people who can help you marry those perspectives and merge the best of all worlds, because nowadays it's not just both worlds, you can have 3 generations in a business or more. So I really think that's key. How can a founder pass on if they associate handing over with their own mortality? How can a next generation member step into something if they're panicked about the responsibility because they don't feel that they've been equipped for it? So I think I just wanted to spend the rest of my time just talking about a few really practical steps to enabling families to have these conversations. Since I'd like to bring it back down to basics. I always say to people, get curious about one another. Ask a senior generation member what it was like. What was the world like when you joined the family business? So ask a next generation member, what are your deepest desires? What do you really want for your life? Leave assumptions at the door. You can pick them up when you leave. So go into a board meeting or a family council meeting or a succession conversation and just leave those assumptions for 2 hours. They'll be there when you come back if you want them to be. And include everyone in the conversation, not just the anointed successor. Tell stories about the business and its origin. We cannot love what we do not know. So make the next generation fall in love with what you own together. Create rituals. It could be really fun to say, what do we do when, I don't know, somebody graduates from college, or what is it that we do in our family that makes our family unique, that really creates a sense of belonging? Active listening and feedback. I love to give people the chance. It doesn't always feel like that to people, but to talk uninterruptedly for 5 to 7, 8 minutes to someone else in the family, and for the other person to listen and feedback afterwards what they heard. You learn so much about each other when you truly listen. And I think, of course, you have to have the governance in place so that when you do decide to have dialogue, that you have it in places and spaces where everybody who needs to be included is included, where everybody's given a voice and somebody doesn't talk over everybody else, and those types of fundamental things that are harder said than done. Go on a retreat together. It doesn't have to be far away or anything, but have a family retreat where you work together and play together. Those things are important. And I'd say to people who are struggling with this, start where you can. If you can't talk about succession today, start talking about your values. Start with the conversation you can have, or ask something, why did granddad start the business? Or why did grandma start the business? And so I just think at the end of the day, we need to combine a few things to make succession and being part of a family business work. And we've got to be honest and open with each other. We've got to respect each other. We've got to communicate about the things that matter. We've got to make sure the right people are there when we do. And we've got to care about each other. And when you do that, there's so much that can be overcome. And if in the process you also manage to nurture feelings of pride in a positive way and gratitude for the business, I think you're onto a winner. So really, when it comes to all of this, I see it as succession opportunities. When you do all of this, when you communicate openly with an open heart, when you structure how you do that, when you give everybody voice, you future-proof your business, leaving it better than you found it and giving someone else a chance to do the same. You create harmony through inclusion. You do get communication as right as it can possibly be gotten, because nothing's perfect. And you can use governance as a guide, and to guide, not to control. And it's also a chance to show younger generations what the business means to you as older generations, because sometimes the older generations have never had a space at a forum for that. And you then create your family glue and your family superpower. So that was all I wanted to share today. I hope that the sound was okay whilst I was doing that.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's so wonderful to hear you talk about the importance of curiosity also, which makes me think about all the wonderful treasure troves that we've had families create by asking next generation members to interview and videotape the older people in the family, and they always get new stories and better stories, and they're there to last and to show, and those are wonderful initiatives that we see in many family businesses. All right, thank you so much. Let's move on to Charles. The floor is all yours.
Oh, thank you. And thank you to the ICTA for having me. I'm certainly honored to be serving alongside my fellow distinguished panelists. And as I listen to what's been said so far, my initial reaction is, wow, the value of their insights and experiences are tremendous. And I hope the audience is feeling that, and will continue to stay in touch with these kinds of concepts. Each of them have done a great job of describing what succession planning is, why it's important, and some of the hows that they've experienced. So I'll share my thoughts on how to develop a process that works for your business and your family. When it comes to succession planning, the key word is planning. And you've heard that over and over again in what's been talked about so far. The future of your family business, your legacy, requires a constant view towards the future. Those views include evolution of strategy, decision-making processes, which is the governance people have been talking about, and succession of leadership. Succession planning is critical to having success with all the other elements of managing your business and family. As was mentioned earlier, I did write a book called The Power of Legacy. In it, I've described from my experience the 6 critical elements of sustainable legacy. And one of the elements in there that's so important is succession planning, and something I call generational engagement, which is sort of the thread or the glue that connects these elements. And succession planning informs each of those elements. So there's several circumstances to be aware of when planning for succession. Generational ability is certainly one of them. What is the ability for generations of your family to lead and govern? We've talked about that a little bit already. Getting to know each member of the family's generation and their knowledge of and interest in the business. It's critical. This will help you identify and inform developmental plans needed for family members. And we talked about not just identifying skills, but developing them as well. It'll inform the timing and execution of succession. Is it planned or unplanned? Because we'll see both of those in our lifetimes. Then there's the element of the expertise needed for the business to have the best chance of success. Excuse me for a second here. This will inform you about, the types of skills the candidates need to be able to contribute to your business success. Each of these circumstances will dictate the structure of the governance for your business, as well as the processes you use to plan for succession. Examples of how to design a framework of succession planning processes. The first step would be to create a list of skills and expertise needed to run the business. In one of the businesses I worked with, we developed a list of 20 potential skills that are needed by the business. And they range from obviously understanding financial considerations, M&A experience, any experience within the specific industry, any industry experience relative to the elements or components of that business, etc. And then within that 20, begin to identify the first 5 priority skills and then the next 5 priority skills relative to that particular business. You update these lists as the business evolves and as the family evolves. And it's important to understand that succession processes should be centered around the needs of the business. There's an age-old question, which comes first, the family or the business? They're both obviously very important, but the answer to that question is the business comes first relative to the needs, because the business provides for the family, and if the business survives, you'll be able to continue to provide for the family, and that's why it comes first. A second step is to start generational engagement programs, which I mentioned, and Adam talked about some of them, as well as Elizabeth. These programs are designed to inform family members about the purpose. In other words, why are we in business? The direction, what are the strategic opportunities and risks, and the intended legacy. How do we see the intended benefit for future generations of the business? They're designed to develop an understanding of the interests of family members about the business. In other words, in return, looking at the business. They're intended to observe the ability of family members to interact with each other. We talked about some of those examples of family reunions that Elizabeth mentioned, people getting to know each other and seeing how they interact with one another. It informs the need for development of governance and leadership skills on an individual basis, which you want to put in place on the journey for succession. It gives family members a view of, and sometimes a voice into, the decision-making processes, which is, how does governance work and how should it work? And how can you have a conversation, a difficult conversation potentially, which allows you to be able to do that with respect and do that with the ability to hear the other side as you go through those processes. The third step is to develop governance structure for your business and a governance structure for your family, along with the decision rights for each and the cadence of timing for the need of change. So some examples of that would be in terms of the timing of the need for change. There's a need in the normal course of careers. So succession of ownership examples. There's a case where the client in this case has an uncle and 3 brothers, or his nephews, were running and owning the business. The uncle was much older than the nephews, of course. He was married, but he never had children. As he fell into ill health later on in his life, he was thinking to himself, I need to be able to cash out my shares in this business. And he all of a sudden demanded, I want you to buy me out. Well, the problem is, relative to the purpose of the business going forward for future generations, that amount of cash would have required sale of the business. And so in that case, setting up a program that says, how do we buy him out over time that doesn't force the sale of the business, is what we did going forward. However, in a succession planning process, you'd be able to understand those needs in advance and begin to plan for the funds that were necessary to do that over time. In the case of emergency, succession of leadership, example would be an insurance company that I worked with. So the father started the business. His one son was in the business and working with it all along. The other son was not involved in the business, did not work in the business at all, and didn't really have an interest in the business pretty much for the life of the time that his father had set up that business for them. What happened was the father died, of course, and so the son that was in the business took over. The problem is that 3 months later, all of a sudden that son died. And now they were left with, how do we make the transition of leadership here? So the son that wasn't involved in the business did become involved, and the element of that business that allowed him to take the leadership role and make the connection of the purpose of the business to the past were the family values. He understood how important the family values were. He made sure that everybody knew what they were and began to implement how they would work in the business. And that leadership role going forward allowed him to be able to continue the process that was in place, even though he didn't have specific knowledge of the working of the business. He was also willing and able to trust the people in the business to help them that were experts in that regard to move forward. So again, we avoid the situation where a business had to be sold potentially by understanding what the connection is to the past and how that should be looked going forward. Another example was when the business needs change, a succession of generations. A couple examples here. In one case, we have a business that's going from G3 to G4. There is a board of directors. The board of directors has family members on it, along with independent directors, outside directors. But the intention is to bring along the future generations. So we developed an associate director program, which involves at least 2 family members, and they go through a process to be selected, who are interested in serving in this role. It's not a voting role on the board, but they get exposure to governance processes, how it works. They get exposure to the detailed workings of the business, what the strategic planning looks like, what the risks associated with that are, and how decisions are made. It's a 2-year program. And even if they don't continue on in a role later on, they are more informed as owners. They're more informed potentially as stewards of the generational engagement for future generations. And they're also better informed on the governance structure and how to run the business, whether they're inside of it or outside of it. Intentional generational engagement programs, I think, were already mentioned by several people. They include people getting together on an informal basis. It could be a picnic, it could be a family reunion. It certainly can start with people who, the little ones are 3, 4, and 5 years old. Clearly, they're not going to be giving a presentation on the business itself or how the products work, but they get the chance to know each other. They get a chance to see how they react to each other in circumstances that may result in conflict. And they get to be mentored, as was mentioned earlier, in terms of how to develop those skills. So I think that's really important. There's another example that kind of cuts across all 3 of them. This was a case where the family, the father started the business. His one son, who was an only child, inherited the business and running it very successfully. And when we were talking about developing a board of directors for him, I asked him about his plans for the future or succession. And he said, well, I didn't have any children, and he's an only child. So you're thinking, well, where does this go? Does this necessarily result in the example of selling the business? And here again, when you look forward to the future, further than the next few years, you may discover there's some elements there. I found out that he did have a stepson. His stepson got married recently, has not been in the business. However, his stepson being married now, in the next, who knows, 3 to 5, 7 years, he may have children. And he liked the idea all of a sudden that he was not able to see about maybe the possibility of down the road this business being handed off to future generations of that business, and beginning to learn how to develop those people into those roles. So you can see that planning for succession is a journey, as has been mentioned. It cuts across all kinds of family circumstances. It's worth sitting down, if nothing else, to at least think about the future and what the possibilities are. Doesn't mean you have to execute those, but it's really important to open your eyes to the possibilities. And as was mentioned earlier as well, the plan for succession should be for family members and non-family members, because there's all kinds of leadership roles. Some of you have faced or are facing some of the many potential pain points of trying to execute a successful succession plan. There are many reasons that only 3% of family businesses make it past the 3rd generation. The main reason is related to conflict, was mentioned earlier. Conflict around purpose, direction, or intended legacy. A proper succession planning will mitigate these conflicts by fostering relationships, which was mentioned earlier, building and developing plans to facilitate the needs of the business and the family, and develop those who are interested in it but don't currently have a path to get there. As I mentioned earlier, the key is to get as far in front of this process as possible. That was echoed by other panelists as well. I will share with you now a slide on a brief summary of all that I just talked about to keep it a little bit easier for you to see. So if you can hang on a second, I will share the screen. Share the screen over here and then put it up. Hopefully everybody can see that. Hang on one more time. Okay. So in terms of the framework we just talked about, the major elements here are identify the leadership and governance needs of the business, as we talked about, and then understanding how people can fit into that process and offering them opportunities to try. Engage the generations of the family over time to identify talent and implement appropriate development plans. Again, the journey involves helping people get there. The best thing you can do for people to be ready for the future is help develop them today. Plan in advance the timing of change by preparing for the possibility of that change. Again, thinking beyond the current state of things. And of course, as everyone has said, it's never too early or too late to start the process. I would encourage the audience to reach out to any of the experts on this panel for the wealth of knowledge and experience you're hearing about. My contact information happens to be on this slide, and happy to share with you conversations as well. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Charles. Wonderful. I have some information regarding Salvatore Tomaselli, unfortunately, that is that he's experiencing some technical problems. He's trying to join us from Madrid. Apparently, there's a power outage and a power lockdown in the entirety of Spain and Portugal. Talk about bad luck. And he's still trying to connect through his mobile phone, but apparently it's not so easy. So we're still waiting for him, but in the meantime, I suggest we move on to the Q&A session, and we'll give Salvatore, of course, the chance to do his presentation if he manages to join us still. So now, let me kick off the Q&A with a question that has not been discussed by any of you in much detail or at length, which in my experience is also an important part of managing and planning for succession. We've discussed a lot about investing in our next generation, leadership development, governance structures, etc., financial structures. But we haven't spent much time talking about letting go. Now, letting go is something that everybody that's involved in family businesses knows that's maybe the most difficult thing to plan, right? Because we all want to let go when the time is right. We hope that we get to choose that time. Obviously, not everybody gets to choose when they let go. So the first one I'd like to reflect on that question is Basma, if you will.
Sure. So when we talk about really like when to ask and what to ask, it's sometimes it's very difficult. However, I think the most difficult questions are like, who wants to continue in the business and who does not want? What's the employment policy? We can even talk about the female employment or female, we can say, what are the roles in the family business? I think this is a very important topic that we can, it is an important topic that it is discussed, usually not discussed in the families.
Thank you so much. Of course, when I talk about letting go, I also talk about letting go by the senior generation who sometimes say they want to let go and sometimes even pretend they have let go, but in practice are still quite active and should.
And we can add to the exit plan, because sometimes it's a very difficult conversation to talk about. And the earlier you talk about is the better for the family. Okay, so if I want to exit, it's not about a conflict. No, I want to exit because I want to exit. It's like everybody has his own perspectives. So an exit plan is not, they don't have to discuss it only when a conflict appears.
Thank you. I'm looking at Elizabeth, and you're in a great position to add something to this conversation, I suppose. Could you share your thoughts?
Yes, thank you. I know and I've seen firsthand how hard it could be to let go. I have talked to people who were afraid of letting go because they had seen their own parents pass on shortly after letting go of the business. So they associate retirement, doesn't have to be retirement, it could be reinvention if we want to reframe the whole concept of, you know, they've simply associated it with their own passing. And so it becomes a really difficult topic. So I think we need to give voice to what the fears are in the senior generation. And I think we also need to help the senior generation figure out what they want to do after leadership. Some become incredible mentors to their own younger family members and also to younger family members in other family businesses. But just like we need to prepare the next gen, we need to prepare the senior gen for life outside of the business, because some of them have not had that much life outside of the business because they've given everything to the business, wanting to make sure it succeeded. I've spoken to people who've done really interesting things like go on a year-long trip after they retired. That helped a lot because it gave the next generation a chance to lead, and it also took them far, far away from their day-to-day. So I think coming up with strategies that will help the senior generation as much as the younger generation is just really key, because otherwise it becomes a really frightening concept. You know, you're in power one day and the next day, some people might sit down and feel superfluous, even though of course they're not.
Thank you. Let me spice it up just a little bit. Charles, do you think there should be an age limit on leading a family business?
That's a very interesting question. I think I've seen it both ways. I've seen it where there is an age limit. In a company I work with in British Columbia, they have an age limit of 70, which I think they're looking to revise in this day and age versus before. And I think the participation question is really the heart of it. What is the role and how do they participate? Not necessarily that it's this role or no role. It's in terms of how do you design something that they participate in and allows them to be using their knowledge to continue the next generation and develop them. So I think the mentoring that was mentioned earlier, and that may or may not be the word everybody latches onto, but at least some element of mentoring on wisdom, on processes, on product innovation, except whatever it may be, is really one of the keys to that. So I don't see it as an age requirement. In fact, I think less and less these days. In fact, if it becomes an age, what I've seen is people are put off by that. And they think, well, I mean, for example, one person was let off the board on the normal rotation in their shareholder agreement when she was 70. And she was very gracious about it, but I know I was having a conversation with 3 months later, and she goes, they kicked me off the board. I didn't want to go. And I don't know if anybody had that conversation with her, but the question is, what is the role that she could stay engaged with, even if she doesn't serve on the board in that case? And so I don't see it as an age limit. I think it is an opportunity for what can be your contribution and how do we make that happen?
Thank you. Adam, you've talked a lot about mentoring yourself as well. Do you think maybe both generations, so let's say the senior generation and the junior generation, should have mentors, one to develop their leadership skills and the other one maybe to help let go?
Yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it. I think we can all learn continuously. So maybe perhaps putting the age aside is more the concept of continuous learning. I think the issue is how to pursue and acquire that learning that transcends ego and location and generational biases, right? So I think the family businesses and offices I advise, and on the Family Business Audiocast, people have many different opinions of this topic, but there seems to be the learning, let's say, inside the family enterprise and outside the family enterprise. So you've seen with Bosmo, like there's the very complicated structures where you need to have structures inside to function, from the charter, the governance, the boards, and ongoing dialogues between the family within. And as we've seen, the family businesses are a very large part of the global economy. So they actually function as non-family businesses. They just happen to be family businesses. So I think that the point you made earlier, Maritas, is that of course the family businesses are quite large, but also they're not exceptional organizations. They need to also take into account the corporate best practices to be with Tony Robbins and John Maxwell and Dale Carnegie and all the legends of leadership, right? And these mechanisms that Charles is referring to, they can be particular to a family business, but they also are relevant to a company. They just need to be more subtle because of the personalities and emotions and egos and complexities of transition within family members. So, perhaps the external learning is even more important than the internal learning. Most family businesses that are focused on continuous education and learning, they can bring that learning in-house, and everyone is sort of homogenized, and there's not an emotional element to it. So I think the external learning, which is dramatically enhanced by post-COVID advanced educational access and costs that are hopefully going down for that additional education, is important. And of course, AI is also partly useful if used in the right way. So there's these massive transformations in society, I think, the last 5 years, where you can spend a lot less money for classes at Harvard X or MIT or Stanford or St. Gallen's or INSEAD or many institutions that offer segments of knowledge that don't require the expensive tickets to send the children away. I think that's an underestimated resource. And also the recent evolution of ChatGPT and other bots are extremely useful if they're utilized properly to learn. There's some recent releases just the last couple of weeks and months for deep research and for like expansive memory where you can really talk to yourself and learn. So it's a time to be grateful, and with all this ample learning available externally, I think the challenge is really finding courage and ways to really force it inside in a way that matches the needs and to apply that knowledge to the next gen. And hopefully they'll embrace that and take it as an opportunity.
Thank you. Of course, it was only a matter of time before we would be talking about AI, right? This is something that in this day and age you can't escape from, and it's a very useful tool. I even heard it's also a very good therapist for those family members or non-family members that need somebody to talk to and have them professionally coach or them or even provide good therapy. A good AI is better than a mediocre therapist. So already, and it's only going to get better. Thank you all for this topic. I'd like to move on to the next topic. Salvatore is still experiencing technical problems, so I suppose we'll have to organize another webinar some other time and invite him that time. I'd like to go back to Basma for a little bit and ask you about conversations within the family business. Which, in your experience, are the conversations that are often postponed? Maybe a key conversation that is postponed often but shouldn't be.
So I think conversation, or we can call it communication. Yeah, and going like really having the tough time communicating old generation with the next generation. It's not only about the conversation, it's really about the procedure of the communication between the different generations. I think this is really the hard part in the family business when you want to go on to talk to your brother or your father, or you want to talk to your cousin. This is really any issue that the family will go through will have to go into these communication, like, difficulties, we can call it. The relationship in the family really does matter, the communication. So really every family member has to know these we can call them the tactics of when to talk and how to talk and when is the best time to talk. All of these are very important. It will make the conversation easier for them. So when we talk about like the one of these I can say about hard conversation is if we talk about the family employment, okay, who will be employed and how he will be employed and where he will be employed. This is one of the tough conversation. Who will be the next CEO? This is another tough conversation that the family will go through. If we will talk even about the we can say the family council, who will be in the family council, who will be representing the family. He will be the eldest son in the family? Will it be the most educated family member? So all of these conversations are very hard for the family to talk about. The earlier they begin talking, before any conflict, before any hidden conversation, we can call back the stage conversations, it will be easier for them. This is going back to the governance and having a clear communication procedures between the family member. It will make a lot of conversation dialogue easier for the family. So I think communication is the key. Having a very clear communication procedure for the family, having a very clear communication, we can say safe environment for the family to talk. This is the key of having a very smooth conversation that everybody can share and ask.
There's a very well-known concept in the family business world called fair process. I recommend that many of our viewers look that up and try to apply it to their own families and businesses. It would be very interesting. Thank you. Elizabeth, you've mentioned some pointers about governance, and you say somewhere in your presentation, governance is there to guide, not to control. Now, I'd like to hear from you some examples maybe of governance structures that can actually do that, or examples that encourage rather than stifle family engagement. Could you elaborate on that?
Thank you. Yes, I think if we look at something like employment policies for family members, I think that could be a good example of where you can have a guide to the types of things you want your next generation to have done or experienced before coming into the business, or you can design it so that you keep 90% of your next gen out. And I think it's, I've seen examples of where people say, you know, I just don't want my brother's kids to work in the business. You know, they're not equipped, or they're this or they're that, or, you know, we want them to jump through so many hoops that we put them off before even attempting to apply. So we can use policies like those to encourage and guide and say, these are the types of things we're looking for. We don't have to be so rigorous that it's like a teeny tiny funnel we have to push, you know, select few people through. Because what we're doing is we want to encourage the next gen, not put them off. That would be one example. I think it's also about really thinking about, like, say, if you include this in your governance, you may have it in the shareholder document, you may have it in your governance around who can own. Again, we can have that and hold it lightly and look at how we would like to pass on ownership, roughly when, and what we would like to ensure that our owners know. Or we can be really rigorous about it and again try to make sure that we engineer things to keep certain people out. So I suppose those are some examples of how we can use that to nurture. Because at the end of the day, trying to control people's behavior will never work. And also trying to engineer how to only have certain people in and keep certain people out will only cause conflict.
Thank you so much. Adam, is it also possible to know, without the formal structures or the formal tests, to know when somebody is ready, when the next generation leader is ready to take on more responsibility? Or how do we find out if somebody is ready?
I think there's a certain, like, Darwinian process of intellectual capital where you can be born and have a core set of skills, right? And you can push yourself with cognitive learning for a period of time. And I've seen many next-gen CEOs of large family enterprises be extremely capable to run the business intellectually, but then at the same time, emotionally, they may not be capable of being a leader. So there's the intellectual capability, then there's the management capability, and then overlapping that, there's the passion and the fit and the suitability with the legacy and mission of the company itself. So you can have, let's say, looking at these circles that Basma showed, for example, you can have check the box intellectually, you can check the box, in terms of the resume and the pedigree, and then you can check the box in terms of passion and suitability with the ongoing purpose of that company. It's very rare to have all three of them. So there is this massive generation of transfer of wealth, and next gens, especially millennials, late 20s to mid 30s, that are facing a lot of pressure and opportunity to stay in relatively large family businesses, let's say over $100 million, 500 billion, 2 billion. So there is a lot of pressure, there's a lot of opportunity, but this is where external exposure and education comes in, and the purpose of the organization to survive and to maintain its legacy with the next generation. And I want to emphasize, I think the next generation is such a broad term, similar to family office is such a broad term. Leadership is a broad term. Legacy is a broad term. So these are important terms to bring to the table. Unfortunately, most family office business entrepreneur owners, they do not have the time, or even the advisors, as we all know, it's important to bring external advisors. I think most very business successful leaders do not have the time to read or have the patience or given the access to external opinions in order to think outside the box. So I think that what that means is either the next gen children are put into a position, perhaps a little bit too early, that they're not really suitable for. That can last for a bit of time, but a lot of the times that won't work. On the other hand, they're not necessarily as wise or as willing to evolve this external information, advisory boards, expand their board of directors. If you have a charter and you're working with your wife or your husband or your family, you don't necessarily need a board of directors like you would in a non-family business. So the question is tricky, because I think there is an obligation to give the next gen and the children a shot, but at the same time, there's the purpose and the continuity and the importance of the company itself and its ability to survive.
Thank you. I must say I agree fully with everything you've just said. It's a very tough question. And you have to take a leap of faith once in a while, and it's risky. It's not only risky for the business and for the family, but also for the individual, of course. And so this is something that you should very carefully manage and not fall victim to your own prejudice or to your emotional view of whomever other people concerned are. So that's the importance of involving more independent outsiders, extending your board to include others that have that share the values of the family, but not necessarily have the emotional ties to the family members or the family history, and that can help you do the right thing. Charles, how do you look at this?
It's a great question, and I think we've all touched on the fact that there are emotional and in some cases cultural influences to making these decisions of who goes next and when and how everybody else feels about it. So I think the point has been made that it's important to have as much objectivity as possible in the process. So for example, not a total structure, because I agree you can't engineer this, as we've said, but a structure that says what is important, what are the needs of the business, and at least lay those out so people understand if that's part of the filter, even a main part of the filter for making decisions, people will clearly understand that's the filter versus I don't like you, or versus Susie pulled my hair when I was 7, so I can't stand her today, and I'm not going to put her anywhere. Those kinds of things. I think it's important that we have the objective needs of the business on the table and discussed so people know that's part of the filter. I also think the points made about having, where appropriate, outside objective views on how these processes work and how they might benefit the business is also part, and that they're involved in that process is also an important part of this, so that family members don't get caught up in the emotional side of it as much as they might otherwise be if there were no sort of guide rails on the process. I can think of a company that I sit on the board of, and the independent directors are the only ones that review and assess performance relative to employment policy for family members, in an attempt to keep it as objective as possible, and that the criteria that was used to measure that is also something that is thought through and evident in other places in industry as a normal part of the process.
Thank you, Charles. Very interesting. Now we're almost at the end of our webinar, but I would love to give you all the opportunity to give us and the viewers, of course, your best advice, or the one advice you want to leave us with, because of course that's an impossible question to answer. There's not one best advice you can give, but still, you know, this is also what all families ask you anyway, right? Give us the solution, please. Let's start with Elizabeth.
Thank you. Two quick things, because I've asked family businesses what was the best advice you were ever given, and several told me that the best advice they ever received was to have fun together. And my own point would be to add to keep talking, no matter what's going on. Keep talking to each other and keep respecting each other. And everything else will be resolvable.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I was still... Charles, what's your best advice?
Well, everything we've talked about here involves some element of leadership, and whether it's difficult conversations, whether it's recognizing emotionals, whether giving people the voice. So what I would say is actually a phrase that I close my podcast on every time, and that is respect builds trust, trust builds relationships, and relationships are the key to leadership. And that the key, as has been mentioned earlier, to each of these elements we've talked about today in terms of trying to deal with them. There's no one black and white answer, as you said, but I think that's the path to consider.
Wonderful. Thank you. Adam, you're up.
So we talked about the walks of life that Next Gen goes through. Again, children or not children. I think it's really important to look at it as a journey. There's a lot of pressure to perform in these organizations, in society. The Next Gen is, I think, caught between the traditional version of capitalism that our generation built, which is very profit focused and growth, overlaid with the speed of social media and venture capital is also changing the nature of work, that is conflicting the focus of long-term business building. And then there's also the passions and interests that Next Gen has that is not necessarily the same as their parents' company. It can be rebellion, it can be intellectual interest, or just lack of fit. So I would say it's a journey. And what I wanted to also add is that the process of succession planning in Next Gen, especially when there's a company being sold and there's massive transitions, I think it's really important to respect the ultimate decisions that the Next Gen makes, whether or not they stay with the company or not, and to encourage them to be the best professionals they can, because their legacy will be connected to the legacy of the original company that they may not stay connected to.
Thank you. Wonderfully said. Basma, would you share your thoughts?
So I have 3 words that I can say. Educate yourself as much as you can by attending events, by meeting other family members, knowing what they're doing, listening to their stories. Educate yourself as a family member about what's happening around different regions, different, even the number of the family. You have like a small family, listen to the large family. You have a large family. Just try to listen as much as you can by attending more workshops, more events, meeting other families, educate yourself. Second thing, ask the right people.
Are you still there?
Amen.
It seems like you're frozen. Well, let me share then, and hopefully Basma will come back soon. Let me share my 10 cents to this conversation. We all know that when you are a successor in a family business or when you take over, you run the risk of making mistakes. Actually, that's not a risk, that's a guarantee. We all make mistakes, and the next generation makes mistakes as well. And the senior generation is often very well aware of those mistakes. They can point at them. And even though oftentimes we say it's all right to make mistakes, we all do it, and that's how we learn as human beings. They tend to point them out in a way that is not constructive. So my advice is stop doing that and realize that they may make mistakes that you wouldn't have made as the older generation, but they're also not making the mistakes that you would have made had you still been at the helm of the family business. So, and Basma's back. So
in 1 minute, so educate yourself, ask the right people. You have to ask the right people. Go to the professionals who have the right, like, you have really to go and ask the right people at the right time. Don't just go and ask anybody. It's a very important, I think it's a very important thing that you have to have all of the information of. Lastly, begin early. Don't put the governance, don't put succession on the side. Everybody wants to work on the business and focus on the business. However, this is a very important thing to continue your business. Begin early, and wishing you all of the luck in your governance, and they say the sustainability of your family relation first and the family business next.
thank you so much, Basma. Wow, I'm so proud of us all for making this such a wonderful webinar with so much content about leadership, about governance, about communication, about all the different issues that are important, the societal issues, obviously, and the changing world that we have to adapt to, and our children will have to adapt to as well. I want to thank the organizers for helping us make this wonderful program, helping me preparing for this program. Of course, the Chamber of Commerce, the Zambia Chamber of Commerce, which is the mother organization of the training academy that organized all this. And I want to wish everybody at home and watching this later a wonderful day, a wonderful time. I hope you take all the advice at heart that you've gotten today, and please join us for future webinars or maybe other workshops that will be organized, I'm sure. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.